I never imagined that one simple evening would change how I saw myself or him. It started with a little help around the house, but the words Ethan whispered that night left me frozen, searching for what they truly meant. Before I begin, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from tonight? Which city? Which place? Which quiet corner of your world? I love knowing where people are listening. It makes me feel like we're sitting together sharing stories across the miles. Now let me take you back to that evening. The house was unusually quiet after dinner. My daughter had rushed out with her friends, leaving the dishes still stacked by the sink and a basket of folded laundry waiting to be carried upstairs. I didn't mind the chores. I'd long grown used to the rhythm of an empty house. But sometimes the silence echoed more than I wanted to admit. Ethan was still there. My daughter's boyfriend. He had offered almost insistently to stay behind and help clean up. First I laughed it off. What young man willingly stays to scrub plates? But he smiled in that calm, earnest way of his and said, "Emily, let me help. You've done enough today." So I let him. We worked side by side in the warm glow of the kitchen light. The hum of the dishwasher, the faint clink of glasses, and the occasional brush of our shoulders were the only sounds breaking the air. I couldn't help noticing how comfortable he seemed, sleeves rolled up, moving with ease as though he'd always belonged there. It felt strange in the softest way, like an old loneliness inside me had been stirred by something I hadn't expected. I tried distracting myself with small talk. "So, Ethan, are you always this helpful? Or is this just tonight's act?" He grinned, the kind of grin that makes you forget your question. "Depends. Is it working?" I laughed, shaking my head, trying to dismiss the sudden warmth that crept into my chest. He had a charm that was subtle, nothing showy, the kind that sneaks up on you when release prepared. When the last dish was put away, I reached for the laundry basket. It wasn't heavy, but before I could lift it, Ethan stepped in. "I'll take it upstairs for you." I hesitated. "You've done enough already." "Let me," he said firmly, not unkindly. His voice carried something more than insistence, something I couldn't quite name. I followed him up the stairs, feeling the weight of each step, as though the air between us had grown denser. He carried the basket into the hallway and set it down, then paused, looking around. "You have a lovely home," he said softly. "It feels lived in, warm." I smiled faintly. "That's just another way of saying it's cluttered." "No," he replied, shaking his head. His eyes lingered on mine, steady and unflinching. "I mean it. Feels like you." I didn't know how to answer. Compliments had grown rare in my life, the kind that weren't obligatory or routine. His words landed deeper than I expected, touching a part of me that had been waiting quietly for acknowledgement. I turned to the laundry, fussing with the folded shirts, pretending not to notice the way his gaze stayed on me, but I felt it like sunlight through a window you're trying not to stand in. Finally, I looked back. "Ethan, why are you really here tonight? You didn't have to stay." He hesitated as if weighing whether to speak. His jaw tensed, his hands slipped into his pockets, and for a moment I thought he might laugh it off. But then his voice lowered softer than before, steady and sincere. "Because I wanted to," he said. "Because I see you, Emily. And I don't think you realize how much that means." The hallway fell into silence. My breath caught, suspended between disbelief and something else. A stirring I didn't want to name too quickly. His words echoed in me louder than they had any right to. I tried to compose myself to steady my voice, but when I spoke it came out thinner than I intended. "Ethan, you shouldn't." "I know," he interrupted gently, holding my gaze. "I know what this sounds like, but I'm not saying it carelessly. You matter more than you think." I didn't move. I couldn't. My heart raced like it hadn't in years, my mind trying to catch up with the truth of his words. There was no judgment in his eyes, no reckless impulse, only sincerity, raw and unguarded. I felt exposed, like he had peeled back a curtain I had long kept drawn. For a moment I didn't feel 50. I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen, and that more than anything left me speechless. I turned slightly, needing a breath, needing to hide the tremor in my hands. The folded shirts blurred in my vision, my throat dry with questions I wasn't ready to ask. Behind me, Ethan stood quietly, giving me space, not pressing further. But his words lingered, burning into the quiet air of my home. That night, long after he left, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. His voice replayed in my head. Not the words themselves, but the weight of them, the way they wrapped around the parts of me I had let grow silent. It was the kind of honesty you don't expect from someone younger, someone who could have easily dismissed me as background. But he hadn't. He had noticed. And somehow that changed everything. I didn't know where it would lead. I didn't even know if I wanted it to lead anywhere. But I knew this. Something had shifted. A boundary I didn't know existed had been crossed. Not with action, but with words that went deeper than I wanted to admit. And in that shift I found myself both unsettled and alive. Morning came like a slow breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The house was still, the kind of quiet that lets you hear the smallest sounds. Water ticking in the pipes, the soft scratch of a bird at the window screen, my own heartbeat counting out the seconds. I stood in the kitchen with a mug warming my hands and replayed Ethan's words in my head. You matter more than you think. Funny how a sentence can rearrange a day. I'd slept with the lamp on, my thoughts circling back to that moment in the hallway. The way his voice didn't push or pull, just told the truth. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't a line. It was a mirror I hadn't expected to look into. By mid-morning, the light in the living room turned golden, catching dust in little constellations. I started a slow clean, fluffing pillows, folding throws, stacking the magazines I meant to read and never did. On top of one pile was a battered box from years ago. Brushes, a crumpled set of watercolors, a few charcoal sticks broken in half. I touched the lid, surprised by the tiny sting it sent through me. I used to paint once upon a different version of my life. I used to look at a bowl of oranges and think about shadow and shape. When did that stop? The doorbell startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the door. Ethan stood there on the porch with a small tool bag in one hand and an apologetic smile. "Your porch light," he said, nodding up at the stubborn, flickering bulb that had been threatening to go out for weeks. "Your daughter mentioned it at breakfast. I was passing by and thought I'd take a look if that's okay." A breeze moved between us, carrying the scent of cut grass from a neighbor's yard. For a second, I just studied him the way you sometimes do when you're trying to decide what to do with a feeling. His hair still damp from a shower, eyes steady, everything about him unhurried. I stepped back and opened the door wider. "Of course," I said. "Come in." He headed for the porch fixture like he'd done it 100 times, and I followed a few steps behind, unsure what to say first. The memory of his voice from last night brushed against me again. He seemed to sense it. "I should say something," he murmured, stretching up to the housing about last night. "You don't need to," I said quickly, then realized I did want him to. I sighed. "No, actually, go ahead." He paused, the screwdriver hanging from his fingers. "I didn't mean to overstep. I saw you carrying the weight, Emily. Not just the laundry basket. All of it. And I couldn't pretend not to." "I know," I said. And I wasn't offended. He glanced down at me, eyes searching for something, then went back to the wiring. "Good, because I meant it and I know the lines here. I'm not trying to complicate anything. I just didn't want another evening to pass where you didn't hear what's true." The bulb came free with a small crackle. He worked with careful hands, the kind that know there's a right pressure and a wrong pressure for everything. The porch was quiet except for the sound of metal turning. I watched the shape of him against the afternoon sky and felt both older and lighter than I had in months. Maybe years. "Ethan," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "For being honest, then let me be honest too." He lowered the tool bag to the step and faced me fully. The porch light disassembled above him like a small silver sun. I folded my arms, not defensively, just to hold myself in place. "Since my divorce," I said, "I've learned how to be the person who manages. I carry the to-do lists, the messages, the birthdays, the doctor appointments, the groceries, the repairs. I'm fine at it, but sometimes I feel like a hallway people walk through to get to where they're going." I took a breath last night. "You didn't walk through me. You stopped and looked." That felt new, and I didn't know what to do with it. He listened like the words were screws that needed a certain order. "Thank you for telling me," he said, and there was relief in his tone and something almost protective. I grew up with a mom who did everything. People would thank her for the big things but not the daily holding it all together. I learned to notice. I guess that's why it's hard for me not to say it when I see it. We let that sit. Somewhere on the street, a delivery truck hissed and moved on. The bulb was replaced, the plate secured, and when he flicked the switch, the porch glowed a clean, steady white. It made me want to cry for reasons I couldn't explain. We went inside, and I put on a kettle out of habit. He stood by the counter, drying his hands with the dish towel. We stayed a careful distance apart. Not out of fear, but respect, like dancers keeping a line that lets them move without stepping on toes. "I don't want to make things complicated for your relationship," I said, sliding teas into 2 mugs. My hands were steady now. "And I don't want to make anything complicated for me either. I just want to name what happened and not turn away from it." "It mattered." "I hear you," he said. "And for what it's worth, that's all I wanted too. I'm with your daughter. I care about her. But I also care that the people around me feel seen, especially you." We carried our mugs to the kitchen table. Afternoon light pulled on the wood, catching the rings of old water stains. He noticed the battered art box on the sideboard. "You paint?" he asked with the same gentle tone he used when he asked if he could help with dishes. "I used to," I said, pulling the box closer. When I lifted the lid, the faint scent of graphite and paper rose up, and something inside me loosened. Life threw some things at me, and painting slipped to the bottom of the list. That happens. You look up and a decade has gone by. "What did you like to paint?" "Blue things," I said, surprising myself. He laughed, and so did I. Bowls, skies, denim jackets draped over chairs. Anything that held color like a secret. "You should do it again," he said simply. "Even for 10 minutes a day." He nodded at the kitchen wall, where a patch of paint near the window was a shade lighter than the rest, because the sun loved it more. "You already live with light. You might as well borrow some for yourself. Something gentle between us then. Not romance, not an invitation. A door to a room in my own house I hadn't entered in a long time." It was startling how quickly the air felt easier to breathe. The front door opened. My daughter's voice drifted in, bright and casual, carrying grocery bags rustling like leaves. Ethan and I looked at each other with an unspoken agreement, then stood. "In here," I called. She swept into the kitchen, cheeks pink from the walk, and smiled when she saw Ethan. "You fixed the light." He lifted the mug in a half salute. "All done." "Thank you," she said, setting the bags down. "Mom, look. Peaches. They were on sale." She kissed my cheek and started to unpack, chattering about a podcast she'd heard and a new cafe around the corner. The rhythm of our home came back easy and familiar, and I realized the moment in the hallway last night hadn't broken anything. It had added a note, that's all. Ethan finished his tea, then rinsed the mug without being asked. Before he left, he caught my eye for a brief quiet second, not a secret, an understanding. After they went, she to meet a friend, he to catch a bus. I sat alone at the kitchen table with the art box open like a small window. The house seemed to lean toward me. I sharpened a pencil, laid a sheet of paper flat, and drew the porch light. Not its obvious shape, but the way it made a circle on the step, a soft dome of safety. Then I drew the shadows the fixture didn't bother to reach, the place where the hydrangea leaves lost into a richer dark. It was clumsy and awkward and entirely mine. The next day, I took a walk through the farmer's market because color lives there without apology. I picked up blueberries and watched the way morning made them almost black. I caught myself smiling at a stack of enamel bowls, a dozen shades of blue, arguing with each other. The woman at the stall asked what I was making. "A start," I said, and she gave me an extra handful for free. That evening, after my daughter had gone to a movie with friends, I pulled a chair to the living room window where the last light of the day glides along the floor. I set up a little table, taped down paper, and pressed the wet brush into the pan of paint until the blue woke up and loosened. The first stroke on the page was a straight inhale. I didn't aim to make anything deserving of a frame. I just let the color move. The water decides some parts for me, the way life insists it will. My phone buzzed with a text. Ethan Light still holding steady. He'd written. I looked up at the porch through the window, strong and quiet, a circle of calm. "Perfect." I typed back. "Thank you for that and for what you said." Pause then. "No problem. For the record, I signed you up for the Community Sense watercolor class. Wednesday nights you can tell me to cancel if you want. First session is just materials and messing around." I stared at the message, the brush hovering in midair. I hadn't asked him to. He hadn't asked permission. And yet it felt like someone opening a window on a stuffy day. I called. He picked up on the second ring. You didn't have to do that, I said, trying to make sure my tone held both gratitude and clarity. I know, he said. It just seemed like a good first step. You can say no. I'm not saying no, I answered. Then, because truth had built this small bridge between us, I added, but let's agree on something about boundaries, about kindness that doesn't become confusion. Yes, he said immediately. Absolutely. His voice was warm, relieved, exactly where I needed it to be. I admire you, Emily. That's not a door I'm trying to walk through. It's a light I'm trying to keep on. We both laughed softly at that, and the ease in it felt like proof that the conversation could exist without strings or shadows. After we hung up, I wrote the class time on a sticky note and pressed it to the fridge. The paper made a small sound, but to me it was thunder, quiet, definitive thunder, promising rain after a long spell. Wednesday came. I almost talked myself out of going twice, then went anyway. The community center smelled like floor wax and coffee, and the room was full of people who had also decided to make something for no other reason than they wanted to. A man about my age put out a jar of wild flowers for anyone who needed a subject. I painted the jar's shadow first, because that's where the truth lives, in edges and softened lines. On the walk home, the town hummed in its ordinary way. Porch lights clicked on one by one, little invitations to safety. Mine was steady and bright, and I felt steady and bright too. Tired in that honest way that comes from trying. A week later, I told my daughter about the class at breakfast. She looked up from her phone, surprised, then smiled slowly like a sunrise. Finally, she said, "I've been waiting for you to do something that's yours." She squeezed my hand. "Proud of you." I didn't tell her about the hallway or the moment or the weight of words that can reroute a person. I didn't need to. The lesson had already folded itself into my days. Recognition doesn't have to be romance, and gratitude doesn't have to be a vow. Sometimes the surprising thing isn't what someone feels for you. It's what you allow yourself to feel for your own life when someone reflects it back with kindness. Now, when the house is quiet after dinner and the dishwasher hums like a patient animal, I stand by the window and study the color of the evening. If you passed by, you'd see a woman in her kitchen with paint on her thumb and a contented tilt to grow shoulders. You might think nothing changed. Everything did. Ethan still drops by occasionally, usually with a practical reason. A loose hinge, a squeaky door, a bag of coffee he swears tastes like chocolate. We keep our conversations easy and clear. He asked once how the class was going, and I showed him a small painting of a bowl, the kind you keep by the door to catch keys and coins. He smiled and said it looked like it could hold anything. I knew he meant more than keys. Here's what I learned, and I'll say it the way he said it to me. Plain, careful, true. Sometimes a person stays to help, and their words land so softly, you don't notice right away that they've put something back where it belongs. In my case, it was me. I belong to my own life again. The light is steady. The door is open to the right rooms. And if I ever forget, there's a porch bowl that reminds me every evening with a circle of quiet brightness. You matter, Emily, more than you.